On the evening of November 4th, 2025, the skies over Louisville, Kentucky were calm. At the UPS Worldport Hub, the largest air freight sorting facility on Earth, operations were running like clockwork. Hundreds of aircraft moved through the facility that night, each loaded with packages destined for every corner of the globe. Among them was a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 freighter preparing for a long-haul journey to Honolulu, Hawaii. The aircraft had flown for more than 3 decades, 34 years in service, and had recently undergone maintenance in September. It was an old but trusted workhorse in UPS fleet. The flight, designated UPS 2976, was staffed by 3 experienced crew members. For them, this was another routine overnight run across the Pacific. They checked the weather, reviewed the flight plan, and performed their standard per-flight inspections. Everything appeared normal. The MD-11 was loaded with several tons of freight, topped off with fuel, and cleared for departure just after 5 p.m. local time. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the cargo jet taxied to the runway. The captain pushed the throttles forward, and the 3 massive engines roared to life. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, nose lifting gracefully into the air. For a moment, everything looked perfect, a normal takeoff, just as thousands before. Then, in less than a minute, something went terribly wrong. About 37 seconds after takeoff thrust was applied, a warning alarm began to sound in the cockpit, a repeating bell that continued for 25 seconds until the cockpit voice recorder went silent. In that short window of time, the left engine separated from the wing, tearing away vital control systems and rupturing a fuel line. Flames erupted from the left wing almost instantly, and witnesses on the ground saw the jet struggling to climb. One worker described seeing a ball of fire trailing from the wing as the aircraft lurched sideways, unable to gain altitude. Data recovered later showed that the MD-11 barely reached 100 feet above the ground. It began to roll left, then pitched downward as aerodynamic control was lost. Within seconds, it was no longer a controlled flight, but a 200-ton fireball falling toward an industrial area just beyond the airport's perimeter. At 5:14 p.m., UPS Flight 2976 slammed into an auto salvage yard and a nearby petroleum recycling facility, triggering multiple explosions and igniting a massive inferno. The crash scattered debris for half a mile. The left engine, torn from its pylon, was found near the runway in a grassy field. Flames spread quickly through the crash site as plumes of thick black smoke filled the sky. Fire crews were on scene within minutes, but the damage was already overwhelming. Buildings burned, vehicles exploded, and those nearby were thrown to the ground by the blast. The 3 UPS crew members on board perished instantly. On the ground, at least 11 people in nearby facilities were killed, bringing the total death toll to 14. Several more were hospitalized with severe burns, fractures, and smoke inhalation. Among the victims was a child who had been visiting a family member working in one of the affected buildings. Louisville's fire department described the scene as a wall of flame and wreckage. First responders struggled for hours to extinguish the fires and recover remains amid pools of jet fuel and smoldering debris. By nightfall, the crash site was a twisted landscape of metal and ash, illuminated only by emergency lights and the flicker of residual fires. The National Transportation Safety Board dispatched a full investigative team from Washington, D.C. to Louisville within hours. Their task, to determine how a seemingly routine cargo flight could fail so catastrophically seconds after takeoff. Investigators quickly recovered both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. Although damaged by heat, the devices were intact enough to yield valuable information. Early data confirmed what the tower had seen, an abrupt engine separation, followed by an uncontrollable fire. The cockpit alarm, that repeating bell heard for 25 seconds, became a central mystery. It was not the standard sound for an engine failure or a stall warning. The tone indicated a critical system fault, suggesting a structural or mechanical failure rather than a pilot error. The MD-11's left engine and wing structure drew particular attention. Photographs from the scene showed that the engine had detached cleanly from its pylon rather than breaking apart internally. That detail pointed toward a possible pylon attachment or mount failure. Given the aircraft's age, fatigue cracks or corrosion in the mounting assembly became an immediate concern. Investigators also examined maintenance logs, which revealed the aircraft had undergone a major structural inspection only 6 weeks earlier. Nothing unusual had been reported at that time. UPS maintenance crews, known for stringent standards, were stunned. No one had anticipated such a failure. Yet within seconds of that separation, the outcome was inevitable. When the engine tore away, it ripped through the wing's hydraulic and electrical lines, effectively disabling flight controls on that side. The fire that followed destroyed the rest. Retired UPS Captain Neville Barrett, who flew the MD-11 for over 2 decades, later told local reporters that once an engine separates, you have almost no chance. The aircraft becomes unbalanced, and at low altitude, there's simply no time or space to recover. He added that the MD-11, despite its reliability, is notoriously difficult to control in asymmetric conditions. Its long fuselage and high-mounted engines make it sensitive to pitch and roll at takeoff speeds. In simulator training, crews rehearse engine-out scenarios regularly but not total engine separation accompanied by a fire. They just didn't have any options, Barrett said. It was over in seconds. The NTSB also began evaluating the role of the aircraft's age and recent repairs. A 34-year-old airframe is not unusual in the cargo industry. Many freighters are converted from passenger models that flew decades earlier. However, years of heavy freight operations put exceptional stress on landing gear, wings, and engine mounts. The MD-11 design, dating back to the late 1980s, includes complex pylon structures that bear immense loads. A small structural weakness or unnoticed crack could become catastrophic during takeoff when maximum thrust and aerodynamic stress coincide. Investigators from the Federal Aviation Administration and Boeing, which now owns McDonnell Douglas's legacy programs, joined the NTSB to analyze recovered metal fragments from the left pylon. Metallurgical testing was ordered to determine whether fatigue, corrosion, or a failed bolt was to blame. Meanwhile, UPS and rival carrier FedEx both voluntarily grounded their MD-11 fleets pending preliminary findings. It was an extraordinary decision that disrupted global cargo logistics, but both companies cited an abundance of caution. UPS released a statement expressing deep sorrow for the lives lost and pledging full cooperation with investigators. The company also dispatched crisis response teams to assist families of the crew and victims on the ground. In Louisville, makeshift memorials appeared outside the airport gates and near the crash site. Flowers, handwritten notes, and UPS uniforms were left in tribute. The community mourned together. For many, this tragedy struck close to home. Worldport employs thousands in the city, and nearly everyone knew someone connected to the operation. While investigators worked, the media pressed for answers. Why had this aircraft, cleared and maintained just weeks earlier, suffered such a catastrophic failure? Preliminary evidence suggested that the sequence of events, engine separation, wing fire, and loss of control happened in less than 40 seconds. Even with perfect training, the crew had no realistic path to recovery. The flight data indicated that they tried to pitch the aircraft back toward the airport, likely hoping to make an emergency landing, but the loss of hydraulic systems rendered control surfaces useless. The MD-11's left wing burned rapidly as fuel poured from ruptured lines. With asymmetric thrust and a burning wing, the aircraft rolled left and descended nose first. Witnesses near the impact site described the sound as like thunder, but continuous. One resident said the ground shook as if from an explosion. Others ran from their homes, fearing another blast. The fireball rose hundreds of feet into the air, visible from downtown Louisville. First responders established a perimeter and began evacuation of nearby blocks. Hazmat teams were called in because of chemical runoff from the petroleum facility that had been struck. It took firefighters nearly 6 hours to fully extinguish the flames. In total, more than 80 emergency personnel worked the site through the night. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the scale of destruction was stark. Crumpled steel, melted asphalt, blackened vehicles, and the faint outline of where buildings once stood. For investigators, every fragment mattered. They marked and cataloged thousands of pieces of debris, mapping the distribution to reconstruct the breakup sequence. The left engine's separation point showed clean shear marks consistent with mechanical failure rather than explosion. There was no evidence of bird strike or sabotage. Flight recorders captured no distress call, only the alarm and ambient cockpit noise. That silence spoke volumes. The crew had little or no time to transmit a mayday. The final seconds on the cockpit voice recorder were dominated by the alarm tone, then a sharp impact sound, and nothing more. As weeks passed, the story of Flight 2976 became one of both grief and reflection. Aviation experts worldwide scrutinized the MD-11's design and maintenance protocols. The aircraft type had suffered incidents in the past, notably hard landings and loss of control accidents, but engine separation was rare. Boeing engineers re-examined stress testing data and service bulletins related to pylon structures. The FAA considered issuing an airworthiness directive requiring detailed ultrasonic inspections of MD-11 engine mounts across all operators. The NTSB, in a preliminary statement, confirmed that the left engine separated from its pylon assembly shortly after rotation, leading to an in-flight fire and subsequent loss of control. It emphasized that analysis was ongoing and that final conclusions could take up to 2 years. While the technical investigation moved forward, the emotional impact continued to ripple through Louisville. Candlelight vigils were held outside Worldport and at a local park overlooking the airport. Colleagues of the crew described them as consummate professionals, people who loved flying and took immense pride in their work. UPS established a memorial fund for victims' families, and the City Council declared November 4th a day of remembrance. For survivors on the ground, recovery was slow. Several victims remained hospitalized for weeks, facing surgeries and rehabilitation. Businesses destroyed in the crash began rebuilding with community donations and insurance support, but for many, nothing could replace what was lost. In the broader aviation world, the crash reignited debate about aging aircraft fleets. Cargo carriers often operate older jets retired from passenger service, extending their lifespan through conversions and maintenance. While these aircraft remain safe under strict oversight, incidents like Flight 2976 expose how a single overlooked flaw can become fatal. The phrase, "it was already too late," echoed through aviation forums and safety conferences. Once the engine separated, once the wing caught fire, there was no path left for survival. Even the best trained crew cannot defy physics when critical structures fail at low altitude. Months after the crash, parts of the investigation began pointing toward a fatigue fracture in a forward mount fitting of the left engine pylon. Metallurgical tests found microscopic crack propagation consistent with long-term stress. The crack may have grown unnoticed beneath a repair plate installed years earlier. During takeoff, the intense torque and vibration from maximum thrust may have caused it to fail completely. When that happened, the pylon detached, the engine dropped, and hydraulic lines were severed, an unrecoverable sequence. Investigators also examined whether vibration monitoring sensors could have detected the impending failure, but available data showed no anomalies before takeoff. In essence, there was no warning. In aviation, redundancy is the rule. Every system has backups, but when the physical connection between an engine and wing breaks apart, there is no redundancy left. The separation destroys systems in an instant. The UPS crew that evening faced an impossible situation: seconds between alarm and impact, no altitude to recover, no time to analyze. They fought until the end, but the outcome was already sealed. The crash of Flight 2009-176 stands as a brutal reminder that even in the most controlled environments, chance and failure can still intersect in lethal ways. Today, the site where the MD-11 fell has been cleared. A small memorial now stands there, a polished metal plaque bearing the names of those who lost their lives. Local residents still recall that evening when daylight turned to fire. At Louisville's airport, safety briefings for cargo pilots now include a reference to the event. It is used as a case study in decision-making under extreme stress, though in truth there was nothing more the crew could have done. For UPS, the loss was personal and profound. For the aviation industry, it became another lesson written in tragedy, one that will shape maintenance standards and design reviews for years to come. When the NTSB releases its final report, it will document every detail: the mechanics, the metallurgy, the sequence of failure. But beyond the data, it will confirm what eyewitnesses, engineers, and pilots already understand: the crew never had a chance. Once the left engine detached, control was gone. Once the warning bell sounded, the countdown to disaster had already begun. The margin between life and loss in aviation can be measured in seconds and inches, and that night in Louisville, those margins disappeared almost instantly. In the end, the story of UPS Flight 2976 is not one of negligence or heroism, but of fragility, the reminder that even the most reliable machines can fail without warning, and that sometimes, by the time we recognize the danger, it's already too late.